Hey y'all, last chapter before our test. Okay, let's get into this. The last two chapters we were talking about ways our body can defend invaders, and now this chapter is talking about how invaders defend themselves and slip through the cracks of our immune system, shall I say. So this is just basically saying that microorganisms love our body. We are the best environment for them, and they just love it and they want to stay, so they're going to fight their way to stay. And this is what that chapter is all about. Communicability is the ability to spread. So if you think about religion, we're talking about like in Christianity when we go to chapel all the time. Because we're all Simpson students. We're talking about a big thing of Christianity is spreading the word. So to spread the word, we need to communicate the word. So think of that communicability, the ability to spread. Infectivity, I like to think infect, invade. So the pathogen's ability to invade and multiply. So that's infectivity. Virulence is so viruses are quite a bit serious than bacterial infections are serious, but viruses are pretty serious because at that point we're getting into our third line defense system because they hide from our innate system, like I'll talk about further on in the chapter. But virulence is a bit serious, and it's a bit severe, usually more severe than bacterial infections. And this is so virulence, think severe, the pathogen's ability to cause severe disease. Pathogenicity is basically an umbrella term of all the three last terms that I just went over. It's the ability for this invader to produce a disease. So all the communicability, infectivity, and virulence depend on the foreigner's success in pathogenicity. Okay. Yeah, and pathogenicity also it depends on the extent of tissue damage. Moving on. Portal entry is how it enters. How the heck did we get it in the first place? It could be ingestion, inhalation, bites. Toxigenicity is the ability to produce toxins, endotoxins, that can influence virulence, so influence causing a severe disease. And this is all a list of common microorganisms. We'll go over these a little bit more when I go over the practice book section. Bacteria. So this is talking about the difference between bacteria and viruses. Bacteria have surface coats that inhibit phagocytosis and toxins. And viruses mutate. There is a mosquito talking about insect bites and virulence and toxogenicity. Portal of entry. Get that mosquito out of here. Okay. Continuing on, viruses can mutate within the cells because they are relatively untouchable, because they are hiding from our innate immune system. So our first and second line defense is part of our innate immune system. So with viruses, we're normally, well, we are going to have to kick in our third line defense, so creating antibodies and cell-mediated immune system to control it. And the reason why bacteria can inhibit phagocytosis is because they have these coats on them, which can be they could be capsulated or they have like peptidoglycan covers on them, which can inhibit phagocytosis. You don't really need to know that, but if you want to get fancy, then enter my world. Okay. Toxin production. Mm, hmm. Need to take a drink. Okay. So, toxin production is most common bacterial infections are on table 8.4. I didn't need to say that. Moving forward, um, that the surface, um, note that bacteria is prokaryotic, so they don't have a nucleus. However, our cells are eukaryotic, so we do have a nucleus. The surface coat or capsule cover the bacteria makes it difficult to detect and destroy through natural body defenses. Some bacteria produce exotoxins and endotoxins that injure cells and tissues. Exotoxins are proteins released with bacterial growth, and they damage cell membranes. Endotoxins are released during destruction of present bacteria and can sometimes activate a coagulation cascade. Bacteremia, so think emia, blood, refers to presence or growth in the blood, and untreated bacteria in the blood can lead to shock. Bacteremia, I'm pretty sure, is the same thing as sepsis. Don't quote me on that, but pretty sure it's the same thing as sepsis. So the big takeaway from this slide is make sure to know, because this was on the quiz, well, particularly my quiz, that exotoxins are released during bacterial growth and endotoxins are released during the destruction of bacteria. So there is a D in endotoxins, so think D, destruction. Exotoxins, just know is the other definition. I don't know how to help you with that one. Just know that endotoxins, destruction of bacteria. Exotoxins is growth. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Okay. Pause. Okay. So back again. So we're talking about endotoxins and exotoxins. Um, so just know that bacteria is prokaryotic, and endotoxins are released in from our proteins. Shoot. Sorry, scratch that. Exotoxins are released with bacterial growth, um, and damage cell membranes. Endotoxins are released during the destruction of present bacteria and can sometimes activate the coagulation cascade. And bacteremia is bacteria in the blood, which I'm pretty sure is the same thing as sepsis. And if it is untreated, it can lead to shock, which is a huge emergency. So just note, exotoxins are proteins released with bacterial growth, and endotoxins are destruction of present bacteria. So what helps me remember this is destruction of bacteria. So destruction, there's a D in endotoxin, so endotoxins destruction, and exotoxins, yeah, there's really not one for me to remember that. I just remember it. Exotoxins. Viral replication. So viruses have a protective layer of protein, and they need a host cell to replicate. Invasion begins with viron binding to receptors of the host cell and then just breaking through. So they invade and come in when they're unwelcome. How rude. And then they start encoding their DNA, and we're stupid because our cell doesn't recognize this unknown DNA. And so we start replicating that foreign DNA and making proteins out of that foreign RNA and DNA. So, whoops, we don't want that. And yeah, so yeah, this they brought up the computer one, but that really did not help me. Um, moving on. Cellular effects of viruses. It all differs depending on the the invader, but the so the biggest thing is it makes us sick, and they can stop host cell function. They can destroy the host cell. They can transform the cell to become cancerous, and they can promote secondary bacterial infections. This is really, really huge. Really know these 4 things, okay? Fungal infection. Okay, so fungal infections, it's not a bacteria infection. So first off, I'm going to bring you back to microbiology. So when we're talking about antibiotics like penicillin and cephalosporins, those would attack peptidoglycan on the covering of bacteria. And so the peptidoglycan would protect the cell membranes of the bacteria. And if we were able to attack it, that peptidoglycan, with penicillin, we could kill the bacteria with it. However, fungi don't have that. They're eukaryotic cells just like us, so they don't have peptidoglycan. And so if there's no peptidoglycan to kill, so we can't use antibiotics on these. It just their fungi is resistant to antibiotics. Um, so well, those particular antibiotics. So yeah, not good. So this means since they're resistant to these, they can aid in the ability to wreak havoc. They are reproduced by simple division, budding, they adapt to the host cell environment really well. They can grow like no other in like pretty much any condition. If you're immunocompromised, you're at greater risk of developing a fungal infection. Um, so so changes in our normal flora can protect us from getting these fungal infections. So I'm going to just have a little chat about yeast infections. So say us girls, most of us have had it says like 3 out of 4 have a yeast infection in their life. When you have a yeast infection, you do not want to take antibiotics for it. In fact, uh, antibiotic use um, can cause yeast or fungal infections. So yeast infections is what I mean, because a yeast infection is a fungal infection. And so we don't take antibiotics for it. Also, we'll notice too that for I'll call it our flower, they tell us not to douche because douching can get rid of our normal flora, strip our normal flora that help us fight the bad guys. So our normal flora, again, is good guys that can help fight bad guys. And so if we're douching and we're introducing bad guys and destroying our new guys through douching, we're not going to have much to protect us from the bad guys. So that can cause a yeast infection as well. Now, if you're immunocompromised, you don't really have this normal good flora too well on your side. So that's why they're susceptible to this stuff. It's because they don't really have many good guys on their side. That's like us who douche a whole bunch and strip our good guys and get bad guys. The immunocompromised can have this issue because unfortunately they don't have a lot of good guys on their side. Parasitic infections. So they're symbiotic. So like if you watch the Discovery Channel, there's like the shark and these little fishes leeching on them and eating off of them. Yeah, that's cool. Parasites do like the same thing, except it's at our cost. We don't like them. And yeah, they're normally in developing countries and ingested through contaminated water and food. Um, they have many different modes of transmission, and there's so many different parasitic infections. The most important thing to note is they can cause tissue damage by the impact of organ function and nutrition. Now, on the aspect of nutrition, I just want to talk for a little bit that one time I read an article online about how in Asia some people were taking like tapeworm, like trying to ingest tapeworms because it helped them become skinnier. And you want to know why? Because that tapeworm was sucking up the nutrition from the host. So that's why they were becoming skinnier. That's not a good thing because it can cause tissue damage. Oops, skipped over one. Big thing, fever, 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 fever is a huge manifestation in infectious diseases. Fever, 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 fever. Increased temp, fever. Do you remember it now? Okay. Vaccines, they give us, they help out with building up immunity and antibodies for a strong secondary response to these uh, foreigners. So it gives us long lasting protective immune responses. And normally, vaccines are viruses that are annuated, so they're weakened. So, our normal strong cells can fight those weakened cells really easily. That's why we're able to fight them so easily that we don't really get too much symptoms from a vaccine. Maybe we'll get a little fever that night, but we'll be able to fight it off really easily because they're weakened. So this can build up immunity. Antimicrobial and antibiotic go hand in hand, it sounds like. So bactericidal antibiotics can just kill the microorganism. Bacteriostatic antibiotics can inhibit the growth of the pathogen until the microorganism is destroyed by the person's innate system. So the first line of defense. So innate, think 1 and 2. So this is keeping the bacteria small so inflammation and flora can destroy it. Where bacterial side can just kill it if it really gets out of hand. Okay. Yeah, so they do go pretty much hand in hand. They're both antimicrobial and antibiotics is to kill the microorganism. Um, okay, what is this last paragraph saying? Um, So the mechanisms of antibiotic are to inhibit synthesis of the cell wall, damage the cytoplasmic membrane, alter the metabolism's nucleic acid, inhibit protein synthesis, and modify energy metabolism. So we're doing all that to the bacteria so it doesn't grow in us and we can just destroy it because we don't want to get sick. Immune deficiencies. So immune deficiencies can either be primary or secondary. It increases the susceptibility to infection. Primary is usually is a genetic defect, and secondary is caused from another outside condition. It affects the immunodeficiencies affect the patient's care, and most immune deficiencies are a single gene defect. So if we think back to all the way back to chapter 2, a single gene defect is something that can be passed down from our parents. It's not a chromosomal defect. And so we have 5 primary types of deficiencies. The first primary is B lymphocyte deficiency, and this can cause low defects in antibody production. So common result of this deficiency is hypogammaglobulinemia. So low levels of immunoglobulins in in the blood circulation, which can be recurrent and life-threatening, can cause life-threatening bacterial infections. So like I was saying, we can give passive immunity to these guys through gamma globulin shots by just giving them shots of straight antibodies to help boost their immune system up a bit. So if we gave these guys a shot of antibodies, would that be passive or active? I just said it. It'd be passive because they're not actually making the antibody themselves. They're getting it from something else, such as a gamma globulin shot. Gamma globulin shot. mm, okay. T lymphocyte deficiencies. Basically, in the name, defects of development in cell-mediated immunity. So defect of T cells, which is decreased production of antibodies because we do need T cells to help in the differentiation of B cells. So we need TH cells to help in the differentiation of B cells, so that can affect antibody production too. And these guys, they normally have a failure of thriving. DiGeorge syndrome involves lack of T cells, which can cause threatening fungal viral infections. It's life-threatening. It's lifelong. And it's a defect in the 22nd chromosome. Results in poor development of body systems. Combined is both T and B cells. So severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID. And it's the third one. And this is a severe disorder, and it's the combined immunodeficiencies of B and T lymphocytes and the circulation of spleen and lymph nodes. It's lifelong. Uh, it has a high fatality rate, and many states are mandating that newborns be screened for this so they can get bone marrow transplants within the first 3 months of life for prognosis of this condition. So, yeah. Back to that last one. I don't know if bone marrow transplants are causing it, if they're getting bone marrow transplants in the first 3 months of life, or if bone marrow transplants within the first 3 months of life are helping it, help fixing the problem. So I'm going to have to ask that. I'm going to go with that it helps fix it, but prognosis means what could be causing, I think. I don't know. I don't know. Really look it up, please. um, the last two are FYI, which are phagocytic and complement deficiencies. Complement, we're not getting those MAC complex to help destroy bacteria invaders and stuff. And phagocytic deficiencies, we're not getting those guys to eat up our invaders. So not good. You don't really need to know that. I love a good FYI. Secondary deficiencies, we all have. It can be from pregnancy, trauma, malnutrition, leukemia, burns, infections, or AIDS. A lot of us have probably suffered this at least once. Pregnancy, it's a big one. AIDS. Okay, so AIDS is a secondary immune deficiency. So it's not a primary, which is due to genetics. It's a secondary, so from outside resources. They destroy T helper cells, which are needed for the development of plasma cells. So plasma cells make antibodies. So if we need T helper cells to help develop plasma cells, and we're not getting that, we're not getting that development of plasma cells. Now we're not getting we're not getting antibodies made, and we're not getting cytotoxic T cells. So this is basically like the same effects of having SCID. Like, this is just not good. T helper cells do a lot. They're going to help us make antibodies. They're going to help us with they help us basically with the humoral aspect of the third line and the cellular mediated of the third line. So that's not good. Really not good. This is like Skid right now. Skid Row. um, uh, and yeah, so it suppresses immune responses against pathogens, and it can lead to the development of AIDS. Um, so first, HIV is destroyed TH cells, and AIDS is low in CD4. Okay. So now we're talking about AIDS. HIV is a blood-borne pathogen. Could be blood to blood, drug abuse through IV, sexual activity, mom to child, utero transmission. Um, Most common is sexual transmission through heterosexual activity. In fact, there's more women than men with it. Hetero or not hetero, HIV is a retrovirus. So rather than giving information in DNA, it gives information in the form of RNA. And it inserts the RNA material into the infected cell, and then it can make new DNA from that and attack that. So it can make new DNA backwards from, so normally our cells go from DNA to RNA. These guys can go RNA to DNA, and then end up causing this virus, and lead to cell death, shedding of infectious HIV particles within the system. Those HIV particles binds with CD4 on the surface of TH cells, decreasing the number of CD4 Th cells. So once you get below a certain number of CD4, you're classified of having AIDS. At the time of diagnosis, the PT, wonder what that's short for, may not be able to detect any antibody show up in the blood work, so may test positive for HIV but be asymptomatic. In early stages of HIV disease, or may have AIDS. Time between infection, the appearance of antibodies, and the appearance of antibodies is called the window period. So you can be infected but not have antibodies, or you can have antibodies and not have symptoms. And this is before you have antibodies. This is called the window period. HIV to AIDS varies from person to person, but antibodies usually present after 4 to 7 weeks of after transmission. It can take about 10 years to develop up to AIDS. AIDS is a low T helper cell count that is less than 200. 800 to 1,000 T helper cells is the normal. Those T helper cells do a lot, guys. I can't stress that enough. That's helping humoral and cell mediated. If we don't have that, that's not good. Okay, so now talking about hypersensitivity. An allergy is a deleterious effect of to environmental exogenous antigens. Autoimmunity is disturbance in the immune system to tolerate our self antigens, and alloimmunity is not tolerating another person's tissue or antigens. Okay, so we all have antigens presenting on our cells. Bacteria and viruses aren't the only things that have antigens. All of us have antigens presenting on our cells. That's what depict what is what. So we have HLC or ML. We have HLA or MLC antigens per being presenting on our cell surface. So everything has an antigen. That's how we know what is ours and what isn't. Okay. So hypersensitivity. Recognize the reactions. Immediate hypersensitivity can occur within a few minutes. Anaphylaxis is rapid and severe and can occur within a few minutes as well. Delayed hypersensitivity may take several hours and is usually caused by cells, not antibodies. So type 1 is IgE mediated, type 2 is tissue specific, type 3 is immune complex mediated, and type 4 is cell mediated. So urticaria is skin rash. Conjunctivitis is inflammation and redness in eyes. Rhinitis is irritation, inflammation in nose. Hypotension, low blood pressure. Bronchospasms, constrictions, spasms in bronchioles. Dysrhythmia is an uncoordinated dysfunctional heartbeat. So these are all IgE mediated hypersensitivities and can't that are in result of environmental antigens can release IgE, which is a mediator of histamine. Histamine contracts bronchial smooth muscle, increases vascular permeability, and causes vasodilation. Type 2 hypersensitivity reactions are against a specific cell or tissue. Cell may be destroyed with antibody and complement. Antibody reacts with antigen on the surface of the cell. Activation of complement cascade leads to cell destruction. Antibody may cause cell destruction through phagocytosis by macrophages, involves toxic products produced by neutrophils, destroyed by complement and neutrophil granulations. Antibody-dependent cell-mediated cytotoxicities involve natural killer cells, recognize antibodies, and release toxic substances that can destroy the target cell. The target cell malfunctions. Okay, so this is when we attack a specific cell. So type 1 is when we attack a specific allergen. Type 2 is when we attack a specific cell. Type 3, immune complex mediated. So is antigen antibody complexes formed in the circulation and deposited in vessel walls or other tissues. Hypersensitivity reactions. In hypersensitivity actions of type 3, antibody binds to a soluble antigen and released into the blood or body fluids. The complex is then deposited into the tissue, and reactions are not organ specific. Serum sickness is caused by immune complexes in the blood, usually blood vessels, joints, and kidneys. Fever, enlarged lymph nodes, rash are common manifestations. Arthus reactions are repeated local exposure of an antigen performed that reacts with a performed antibody and forms an immune complex in the walls of the blood vessels. So, okay, refreshing again. Type 1 is in response to an antigen. Type 2 is in response to a specific cell. Type 3 is when we have a weird antigen-antibody complex that causes havoc. And is put into the what do you call it? The blood and tissues of the blood, capillary tissues of the blood. Type 4 reactions are either through cytotoxic lymphocytes or cytokine producing TH cells. So these guys, I should probably do this. Gosh. So they do not involve antibodies. They're from T cells. So refreshing over, type 1 is to an antigen, type 2 is to a cell, type 3 is to a weird, what would you call a weird antibody antigen, a weird puzzle complex, and type 4 is due to T cell stuff, where we're producing our T cells are just wreaking havoc, and due to like an invader or something being introduced, and the T cells are what are causing us to have a reaction. So I think we could do this alphabetically. So type 1 is A for antibodies, Type 2 is C for cell. Type 3 is wrong match. We'll go with that. M for match. And type 4 is T for cytotoxic T cells. So back to this. 1, and allergen. 2, cell. 3, wrong match. And 4, T cell. Okay, moving on. We got that down. An allergy is the most common type of hypersensitivity. This means that environmental antigens are the primary cause of reactions in those who are genetically predisposed. Allergens are particles that are too large to be phagocytosed or is surrounded by a protective coat. Allergen is then released after enzymatic breakdown of the larger particle. So basically, allergies are a fairly safe, like they would not necessarily cause havoc on our body, but our immune system is compromised or genetically predisposed. So some genetic features can make us think that a bee sting would kill us, so we're going to attack it and think that it's a harmful substance when it technically isn't. And when we try to break that down, that's just going to cause too much histamine release and cause a allergy response. Okay. Autoimmunity is when we recognize our own body cells as a invader, which you shouldn't be attacking your own body cells. That's not good. The most common one of this is systemic lupus erythematosus. And these guys, I believe Selena Gomez has this, and it's just excessive levels of antibodies that attack our own cells. So SLE, we get butterfly rash, renal disease, cardiovascular disease, hematologic, so blood changes, arthralgias or arthritis. So when I remember Selena Gomez talking about her getting an organ transplant, she was saying how she had a hard time opening a water bottle because it hurt so bad. Her arthritis hurt. They had to give her a new kidney. She's getting a kidney transplant, so that makes reason to why she was probably having some severe kidney damage due to kidney disease. I've haven't seen her with a rash, but this girl on the picture has a rash. You get blood changes and cardiovascular changes. So it is really sad and it doesn't look like it's any fun. Alloimmunity is when antigens react to a tissue. So basically, this can happen with tissue typing of HLA. So like I said, all of us on our cells have HLA, human presenting antigen, I'm pretty sure it's called. And these are what present on the outside of our cells to let our immune system know that it's our cell. However, like I said, there's type A and type B blood, so we all have different types of these, so we need to make sure to find a good match so we don't attack a human cell that we think is an invader when it's may not be an invader or a pathogen. It's just that we think it's our body thinks it's an invader because it doesn't have the same antigens that are presenting on the cell as our own body cell antigens. So, uh, like I said, blood types can need to definitely be focused on. No A doesn't like B, no B doesn't like A. B and B can A and AB can accept them all. O can't accept any of them. And then it's yeah. So just know that. Look over a chart that goes over it. Um, yeah. Because there's antigens and antibodies, and so you're going to produce antibodies that don't match up with your antigen. Okay? Um, so RH is, I remember this from physiology. The RH actually came from, it was diagnosed in rhesus monkeys, and we first found out that there's positive and negative blood types. So this is what it is. RH is, or the D antigen, if you want to call it. If you have an RH factor or a D antigen on your blood cell, you are positive, and if you don't have the RH, you are negative. Now, these can pass through, um, and blood, we have, yeah, so basically with mothers, um, if they come in contact with a baby's blood, so if a Rh negative mother has a Rh positive baby, she can create antibodies against the Rh positive, which will attack the Rh positive baby's red blood cells and cause severe, it can just severe, it can destroy that baby's blood, and so that's not good, and it can reject the baby. So um, we don't want that. So that's why we normally give a RhoGAM shot. And those are antibodies that can help us that can help us protect the baby. Oh wait, what is it? RhoGAM. We'll learn more about it in OB class. Yeah, we're given. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, RhoGAM to prevent us from secreting antibodies against Rh positive. Okay, graft rejection is just when a transplant is rejected. So a hyperacute rejection is when it rejects immediately. It's usually a result to poor so it's not human presenting antigen, it's human leukocyte antigen. So basically the cells don't match, and transplant teams normally screen these a whole bunch of times before to make sure that it won't get rejected, because that would suck to give up your kidney to someone and then the kidney just end up being rejected. So now it was a waste of a kidney, you know? You really, really, really need to match those really well. Acute is when over days and months your body attacks that transplant organ. So we can have meds to suppress our immune system from rejecting the foreign tissue, and we can help with that, but they don't always work. And chronic rejection is it happens over months and years, is very slow, and it's just poor cell mediated response and causes complications due to the human leukocyte antigen. All right, we are all done with that chapter. Finally, going over going over learning objectives. Communicability is ability to spread from one individual to others. Infectivity is ability to invade and multiply. Virulence is severe disease, ability to cause severe disease, and pathogenicity is ability to produce disease, which relates to all the past three terms. Portal of entry is how it entered. Toxigenicity is ability to produce toxins or endotoxins. Antigenic genic drift and shift. So drift is the variations in viruses that involve the accumulation of mutations of genes that code for antibody binding sites. Shift is the process of two or more different strains of a virus or strains of two or more different viruses that combine to form a new subtype having a new mixture of surface antigens of rather than the original strains. So some so drift is when it changes its shape. So basically, like I was saying, it changes its antigens from rather than a heart to a circle. Shift is when we change it from instead of one guy's like, I have a heart, you have a circle. Let's have heart and let's get together and make hearts and circle presenting antigens. So shift is when they come together. Drift is when they just change on their own to cause antibiotic resistance. Bacteria infection can be aerobic or anaerobic, positive or negative. They can produce exotoxins or endotoxins. Viral can be transmitted in various ways. And it's basically where their RNA invades and turns to DNA, and they're able to hide from the innate immune system, release enzymes that damage host cell, can transform host cell to cause cancer, infect the host cell. Not good. And we would need our third system to come in to fight that. Fungal infections are large organisms that, like I said, no peptidoglycan, so antibiotic resistance to like penicillin and stuff. It's a eukaryocyte, and yeah. Um, explain how live, annuated, and killed vaccines differ. So annuated means weakened. Um, this type of vaccine can cause longer lasting immunity. Killed vaccines are usually bacteria or antigens. Um, and so the immune compromised really have trouble. They can't get vaccines because they don't have a good enough immune system to protect them and fight even the weakened vaccines. That's why we don't really give a whole bunch of these higher end vaccines to babies, because their immune system is already weak anyways, and they wouldn't be able to fight even the weakened type. And you really can't give these to people with like AIDS. Bacterial resistance and explain how bacterial resistance to antibiotics occur. So if the bacteria is not completely killed off, the surviving bacteria can proliferate with the mutation that allow them to survive, and they can pass along this mutation through plasmid exchange. So basically, one time I had a UTI, and I wanted to be very holistic and stuff and not take, once I started feeling better, I didn't take the whole bottle of antibiotics that I was prescribed. So I stopped once I started feeling better, and then that just made me get a worse UTI. So don't do that. Take your antibiotics. Congenital and acquired immune deficiencies. So congenital is primary. It's obtained at birth. This is B, T, and SCID immunodeficiencies that are usually single gene defects. Acquired is secondary. So like AIDS, through sex, through drug abuse, through a whole bunch of different things can cause this. Yep. Discuss the pathogenesis of acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. So it's a retrovirus. It can go in as RNA, make DNA, and the DNA becomes inserted. And this is not good. It's a virus. It can be acquired through sex, IVs, a whole bunch of stuff. Um, and when I'm talking about immune deficiencies, really keep in mind that immune deficiencies aren't the same things as autoimmunities. So they're completely different. I sometimes forget that. I'm always like, oh, autoimmune disorders are not the same thing as immune deficiencies. Um, So, potential of HIV infection and its progression to AIDS. So, a decrease in CD4 opens up patient to many other diseases and bacterial infections due to their immune compromised state. So, this is below 200 CD4s. It happens through, it's when HIV progresses to AIDS, and it's a retrovirus that can become double-stranded. DNA can come in, and the CD4, it binds to the T helper cells and destroys CD4 helper T cells, and it it resembles the flu, the signs and symptoms. Treatment for AIDS to stop the replication of the virus is taking antiviral drugs. That include inhibitors of enzymes that reverse transcriptase, viral protease, and inhibits the fusion of HIV and cell membranes, and inhibits viral integrase enzyme. Define 3 stimuli of hypersensitivity. So hypersensitivity is a response to an antigen resulting in a disease or damage to host. Broken down, these reactions can be broken down by the source. So there are 3 types of hypersensitivities. There's allergy, which is an environmental allergen; auto, which is a disturbance with your self recognition, so you attack your own cells; and alloimmunity is when you attack a foreign tissue, so another human cells, like a transplant, an organ transplant. Describe and compare the 4 types of hypersensitivities. Type 1 is IgE antibody induced due to allergens. Type 2 is characterized by reactions of cells. Type 3 is immune complex mediated with antibody antigen bindings, and type 4 is T cell lymphocyte antibodies. Okay, describe how an individual becomes sensitized to an allergen in type 1 hypersensitivity reactions. Okay, so in order to become sensitized to an allergen, you have to have multiple exposures. Some individuals, the primary exposure causes IgE production. Repeated exposures that the person becomes sensitized. IgE is relatively short lifespan in blood because it has a high affinity to Fc receptors, blah, 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 blah. So basically, you build up more antibodies that your body just comes accustomed to building up antibodies every time you come into contact with this allergen, which can cause mast cell degranulation. And yep. Okay, so subclass of IG4 has a specific receptor on mast cells. The Fc receptors of mast cells bind to IgE that has not previously interacted with an antigen. If further exposure of a sensitized individual to an antigen occurs, one molecule of antigen binds simultaneously to two molecules of the IgE Fc receptor. Okay, so basically, if you have Fc receptors and Ig receptors coming in contact together with this antigen, you're going to cause mast cell degranulation, which releases histamine, which can cause aspects of acute inflammation. Okay, moving on. The clinical manifestations of an allergy reaction type 1 are attributed to histamine mostly. Tissues are affected, contain large amounts of mast cells, and release histamine during degranulation, which cause acute inflammation. Differentiate immediate and delayed hypersensitivities. So immediate hypersensitivity is atopy, so a allergy such as hay fever or asthma. Anaphylaxis, which is a systematic fatal reaction that occurs with airway obstruction and circulatory collapse. It's IgE mediated, involves mast cells, basophils, and allergic mediators. Type 2 is antibody mediated, IgE, IgM. Antibodies cause cell lysis. Type 3 is immune complex mediated. Type 2 example would be blood group incompatibility. Ooh, yeah, no, that's not right. That's not right. So antibody mediated. Type 3 is immune complex mediated. Yep, and type 4 is T cell mediated. Moving on. Autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune is such as lupus. Your self-antigens are recognized as foreign and we start attacking them. Allo is transplant. You don't like other members of the same species cells. Discuss the different types of blood group. Just look up on Google on that one. A has anti-B, B has anti-A, AB likes them all, O doesn't like any. It only likes itself. The importance of Rh antigen for childbearing age is Rh positive women who have had the D antigen. Oh wait, Rh negative women. If an Rh negative woman does not have the antigen and she has a Rh positive baby in the blood, she can create antibodies against the Rh positive and attack the fetus's blood, and this can in turn lead to death of the fetus. The significance of human leukocyte antigen in tissue and organ transplants. These need to be matched up. Otherwise, if they're not matched up, you're going to reject it. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm going to close this one up for this chapter. Good luck on the test.